Hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap, and what could be better than a shiny new laptop? Well, how about 3 of them? So these guys are the upper end of Huawei's 2020 refreshed MateBook lineup. In the center, we've got the new MateBook 14, and as you can see here, it packs in the latest Ryzen 4000 series of chips. Over here, we've got the super thin and light new MateBook X with its apparent sawn-off trackpad here. And then finally, we've got the MateBook X Pro, which blends power and portability into an ultra-premium laptop. Firstly, though, a big thank you to Huawei for sponsoring this video, although as always, I will remain objective. All opinions are completely my own. Basically, sponsorships just mean that a company gets to give me a product and I'll make a video about it, but what I say, my testing, my thoughts are all completely my own. And I figured since all 3 of these laptops are pretty interesting by themselves, it would be quite useful to do a bit of a roundup and a buying guide. And so by the end, hopefully you'll have an idea which one's sort of best suited for you. So let's start with this guy, the MateBook 14. It's the cheapest, and in my opinion, I think the most exciting. It's actually more powerful than even the top-end MateBook X Pro, which costs nearly 60% more. So the 14 here starts at £750 or £950 for this top spec one, and this 2020 refresh adds the latest Ryzen processors, along with onboard Radeon graphics. And most importantly, we're getting the full-fat 45-watt chips in here versus the 15-watt Intel parts in the other machines. Next up is the brand new 13-inch MateBook X with a 10th gen Intel Core i5, which comes in at around £1,400, and is for people after a super lightweight ultra portable that's got a great screen, but mainly for sort of lighter workloads, browsing, watching video, bits of office work. But this is all about being as thin and light as possible. And finally, top of the pile is this £1,500 14-inch MateBook X Pro, which gets the latest 10th gen processors. I've got the i7 in here, along with 16 gigs of RAM, and importantly, a discrete NVIDIA MX250 graphics card. Although you can get this with the i5 and without the dedicated graphics card for about £1,200 if you just want the form factor, but not necessarily the best performance. And as you can see, I've also got this in a very snazzy emerald green, although I think if I worked in the Huawei marketing department, I'd maybe call it arguably blue. But either way, I think it looks really smart. But there's definitely a consistent design language across the line, and build quality goes toe-to-toe with any other premium laptop I can think of. All are magnesium aluminium with thin screen bezels, the same great keyboard, Huawei Share Tech, which I'll come back to in a second, and they all come with a fingerprint reader built into the power button, so it's just one press to power and log in. And of course, we also have this love it or hate it pop-up webcam. It's great for security because you can physically hide it, but not so good for looking up your nose during web calls. And finally, one of my favorite features is that they all come with these high-res 3x2 glossy touchscreens, which if you guys are familiar with my channel, you know that I much prefer this aspect ratio. It just means everything feels a little bit less cramped as you've got this extra vertical space. Now, in some ways, the 13-inch X and the 14-inch X Pro are the more similar of the 3. Both are lighter than the MateBook 14, have Intel U series processors, so a little bit less powerful, a bit more focused on portability, and they also feel a little bit more premium thanks to the one-piece aluminium body with slimmer dimensions and also high-res 3000 by 2000 touchscreens. This guy weighs just 1 kilogram. Honestly, you have to pick this up for yourself to really get a sense of how lightweight it is. While the X Pro, the larger one here, which is 14 inches, is about a third heavier and also about 1mm thicker. But importantly, it's also a little bit wider, and you can see they've managed to squeeze in some speakers here beside the keyboard. And actually, in my experience, the X Pro here has among the best speakers I've ever heard on a laptop. I think maybe second only to the MacBook Pro 16, but they are seriously, seriously good, and they support Dolby Atmos. Coming back to the X for just a second, and you can see here, it kind of looks like Huawei sliced off the lower part of the keyboard deck here, meaning we get the trackpad that looks like it's got a bit too close to the edge and forgot to stop. It's the infinity pool of trackpads, if you like. When it comes to overall size though, the trackpad, battery life, and performance, the cheaper MateBook 14 here and the Pro X are actually closer, especially if you get this in the higher spec with that NVIDIA graphics chip. Now, I'm sure you guys will agree, but the most important feature when it comes to buying a new laptop or anything really is value for money. And so I think the MateBook 14 does give you the best bang for buck. It's the cheapest, and you also get the best performance. But to be honest with you, this really doesn't feel that much less premium than the other two. Yes, it's a little bit thicker, a tiny bit heavier, the bezels aren't quite as slim, and the screen's a little bit lower res, although it's still 1440p basically, so that's still very, very good. One advantage of the X Pro though, aside from the design and also the better speakers, is this does have the brightest screen. So if you're using this outdoors or on your commute a lot or in a bright office, then that may come in handy. But then if we go back to the MateBook X for a second, obviously the key selling point of this is that portability, but one other advantage is this is the only laptop of the three to come with the latest Wi-Fi 6. So if that's important to you, then maybe that is another reason to go for this. Now I do have a couple of little criticisms about these three. Firstly, none of them support Thunderbolt 3. While we have USB-C on all of them, and the MateBook 14 comes with a couple of extra ports. We've got HDMI, two full-size USB-As there. We've got two USB-Cs on the X, and then the X Pro has one full-size USB-A and two USB-Cs, and all have headphone jacks as well. As I say, unfortunately, none of them support Thunderbolt 3. So if you're planning to hook these up to a Thunderbolt 3 monitor and have, the display and the charging all at once, which is pretty useful, or even maybe attach an external graphics card if you want that extra graphics performance, although honestly, I'm not sure how many people do that. And at least on these two, you'd probably be bottlenecked quite significantly by the U-series processors. So Thunderbolt 3 would have been nice to see. And I think the other sort of more controversial issue is the webcam, this little pop-up guy down here. So you can just press it closed, as you can see, and you can physically hide it. So if you are someone who puts a bit of tape or tries to disable the webcam for security reasons or privacy, then you can just completely hide it. But then again, because it's on the base of the keyboard, it is looking up your nose. I guess the workaround for that is if you are doing a web call, just have the laptop a little bit higher, stack it on a couple of books or something, and you're good to go. So it's not really a deal breaker, and for some people, that actually might be a real selling point. Now moving on to performance, and despite the fact that both the Intel laptops here have 15-watt chips, they actually do pretty well, especially the i7 in the X Pro, which actually matches the Ryzen 4800H in single-core performance in Geekbench 5. Multi-core is a different story though. The Ryzen 4800H races ahead and is fully twice as fast as the i7, jumping into a bit of Cinebench, and the 4800H in the MateBook 14 scores over 3 times higher than the i7 in the X Pro. But it just highlights what the 14 can do with that 45-watt, 8-core, 16-thread Ryzen chip. Moving on to graphics and gaming, and if we start with 3D Mark, we can see the Ryzen's onboard Radeon graphics slightly outpacing the X Pro's NVIDIA MX250. But both laptops are able to hit around 30 FPS on low settings in Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 720p. Now I think it's fair to say all three of these laptops are supposed to be pretty portable, and so of course battery life is very important. Now the X Pro and the 14 here share the same 56 watt-hour battery, whereas the X makes do with a smaller 42 watt-hour cell. So in my standard battery life test, where I run a full screen YouTube video at 50% screen brightness on balanced battery settings, the X Pro here lasted the longest at just under 8 hours, followed by the MateBook 14, which managed under 7 hours, and then the X here only managed 4, which is pretty average and a little bit disappointing, but I guess it makes sense given the smaller battery. The backlit keyboards are the same on all three laptops as far as I can tell. The responsiveness and the clackiness, if you will, of the MateBook X feels the same as the thicker X Pro and MateBook 14, and it feels good to type on. As for the trackpads, the MateBook 14 and the X Pro feel pretty similar, both have a responsive feeling click and a good size, though the surface on this one is a little bit smoother than the 14. However, the trackpad on the MateBook X here, as I say, looks like Huawei's taken a saw and just cut off the bottom, and sometimes I do find my finger just sort of falling off the edge a little bit and also not being able to click right at the bottom here. But it looks stylish, obviously it's taking full advantage of all the space available, it's got a nice smooth texture and it's very responsive. So far so good then, but there is one bonus feature with these laptops, and that's Huawei Share. If you have a compatible Huawei or on a phone, just touch the keyboard to connect, and you can then drag and drop photos, videos, and files to and from the phone and the laptop. And you can also even control the phone via the touchscreen, which is very cool, although it can feel a little bit laggy sometimes. So all in then, these are some pretty solid updates to three of my favorite thin and light laptops. There are a couple of niggles, the lack of Thunderbolt 3, not everyone's going to love the pop-up camera, and these are all slightly on the pricier side, especially the X Pro here. And actually, if you do want a more affordable one of these sort of laptops, then I'll leave a link to my MateBook D review, which I made earlier in the year. But for me, I think it's the MateBook 14 that's the best all-rounder. With that new Ryzen processor, the Radeon graphics, a good selection of ports. The screen isn't quite as nice and it's not quite as premium overall, but I think for most people, including myself, this really is all I need. But the big question, which one would you pick? Would you go for the MateBook X, the MateBook 14, or the MateBook X Pro? Let me know in the comments below. And if you did enjoy this video and want to see more from me, then don't forget to hit that little subscribe button down below. And I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat. Boof, boof.